Hello, there we go. Welcome along, everybody. I hope everyone is having a really great evening. And there is, I understand, a whole bunch of you in the house tonight. Welcome along. Let us know where you're from. You are with Maree and Alistair here for this very special RCR Unplugged Face the Music edition. We talked about this last night. Both you and I were on the foundation members call as well, Alistair. We're pretty excited. You have done a bit of work behind the scenes, and it's exciting to actually bring an interview to fruition, which we're going to do tonight.
Yeah, it is really exciting because, and you can see over the last week or so, since the news broke that the famous four don't want to turn up, and it's caused the a whole week of testimony to be nixed. It just shows you've seen in the media just how much this matters to people, and you've seen it with our Face the Music campaign too, right? It means a lot more, and I think it's blindsided them. I don't think they realized just how deep the feeling was.
Yeah, no, I don't think they did at all. So, what we're going to do in this special Face the Music edition, remember, if you haven't signed that petition yet, people, facethemusic.co.nz to see if we can compel the commissioners to get those four, the fearful four, as I'm calling them, to turn up to the public to get some public hearings happen. So do that. Look, everyone is. Oh, look, someone from Mapua. We were. Oh, Lindley. It's the fabulous Lindley. We were just there the other day. We had a fantastic time. So do make sure you do that. Now, this is how tonight's going to roll. Alistair and I are going to look at some of the media in the last week since this news broke. I mean, it feels so much. I mean, it's been what, six? What are we now? Tuesday night. It's not even been. It's 5 and a bit days since
Yeah.
this broke. It feels like 5 and a bit months. It's been such a huge story. So we're going to talk about some stories that have rolled with us. We've got some clips to play you. Then we're going to play this very special interview. How we're going to do it tonight is a little different to how we've done it on RCR 360's Unplugged before. And that is we're going to actually keep the chat rolling because I know that you guys will have quite a bit that you want to say. We'll keep it rolling until we play our premiere interview. Then we will turn it off, but then we will turn it back on again. We will be able to see any of your comments during the interview. So we are going to keep the chat rolling for much longer than we normally would. Okay, so make sure you throw your thoughts and ideas in there. If you're watching on a mobile device, it may be easier to view it in portrait mode than in landscape mode. So it's this way as opposed to this way. That will actually help the chat row. It's saying that I'm blurry. It's probably my internet connection, to be honest. Believe me, at my age, darling, blurry is good. That's all I have to say. I'll go with blurry. Yes, so that's how we're going to do it. So, it has been a huge week. I'm going to kick it off right now as that everyone comes pouring in. And the only reason I'm going to kick it off, Alistair, is that we've got a lot. Oh, we've just clicked over 700. We've
Over
got a
700.
lot of ground to cover tonight, Alistair.
Yeah, and look, all this stuff that we're going to cover at the start,
Yeah,
it's just sort of framing the interview, isn't it?
yeah.
That's what it's about, and it just so happens that I have this interview to play tonight, and it's come at the perfect time. It's dovetailed just perfectly with the story, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, so perfectly. So perfectly. So let's get this show on the road. Now, the Royal Commission of Inquiry into New Zealand's COVID-19 response, phase two has now been dealt a major blow, with four of the country's most senior political figures declining to appear. Former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, ex-Finance Minister Grant Robertson, Health Minister during the pandemic, and the COVID Minister Chris Hipkins, as well as the Health Minister Ayesha Verrill. They've all turned down their invitation. Obviously, these Cinderellas did not want to come to this ball. Ardern said she's already given extensive public commentary and believes her written statements are sufficient. Of course, she does. Hipkins cites that he's done enough already in written submissions, and he's answered all of these questions already with his various public media appearances. Robbo, well, our friend Robbo, he points out that his current commitments as Vice Chancellor of Otago University, saying he just can't spare the time. I suspect doesn't want to tarnish his new book. launch, really. I do. So I do feel his book is out, people. I do feel a plant grant campaign coming on. Just saying, plant that book in places that it doesn't need to be seen. There you go. And finally, Viral. Well, she thinks her decisions were thoroughly documented in cabinet papers and official records. So therefore, she's hiding behind the others, terrified, I think, and really not wanting to have the record set straight. Now, RCR has been running a sustained campaign to have the key pandemic decision makers, which include these four, to face music. Only one of our disinformation dozen so far has appeared, and that has been, the Helen Harris. Now, alongside the public launch of the People's Position, I hope you've got your copy, the submission by Voices for Freedom, which we did print in a fantastic book. Hold it up. I know you've got it there, Alistair. Here it is. Here's one we happen to have prepared earlier. Now, this has created a huge amount of awareness out in the public sphere. I believe that there is now an expectation of the general public that they want to see and hear from this lot. They want to see why so much of our control was given over to them during the pandemic, and we want to hear from them. So, with all of that said, Alistair, what was your initial reaction when this, because you and I were actually on the phone together when this news broke last week. So
You
what
were.
was you, yeah, we were. So what was your initial reaction to it all?
I thought I think that it's bombshell because what we're seeing is we're seeing in real time that they don't want to be questioned. Why don't they want to be questioned? And then, as we're going to hear in one of the clips that we've got to play, the likes of Chris Hipkins and Jacinda Ardern have been seeking legal advice. And I just think that to me is the greatest admission that they know that they made some decisions that could be dodgy. If you did it entirely, if you were in their positions and you did it entirely in good faith, there would be no reason for them not to go along and do their duty and explain to the people of New Zealand. Chris Hipkins tells us constantly, and Jacinda Ardern tells us constantly that they've been available for interviews. Well, that's not quite the same. You can dodge questions. We're going to hear that in one of our clips, aren't we, of Chris Hipkins dodging the questions. So, yeah, I just think that it's the turning of the tide. That's probably how I would sum it up.
Yeah. I mean, the initial knee-jerk reaction from me was that I think, like so many people here, there was a thought bubble that with big neon WTF that went off.
Yeah.
However, as time wore on, as the hours wore on and the days wore on, and the media coverage wore on, and the comments wore on with those out in the legacy space and in Parliament, this is looking like not only a turning point and a turning of the tide, but also to a gift. I really do think that when you have are from the class of people that they are, where they don't think their farts stink, they've really either they're aware of what they've done, but whatever the threat is from over and above and elsewhere that we don't know about, that is so great that they're withstanding all of this going on. I mean, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think just sort of looking forward to the interview in a little while that we're about to play. As you watch that interview, you're going to see that there were things that we were not told, and they were pretty big things as well. And I think that's probably sitting in the back of their mind. And there are things that we just don't know about. But what we do know about are things like what you're going to hear about in the interview tonight. I would be trying to avoid questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, to remind people, these are some of the reasons that were given by our fearful four did not want to turn up. The first one is private interviews provided sufficient evidence. More than once, Christopher Hipkins said in interview in Trial Run, "Oh, I answered plenty of questions. In fact, they ran out of questions for me." That's what he reckoned. They ran out of questions for me. Both Jacinda Ardern, Chris Hipkins, Grant Robertson, and Aisha Verrill all were interviewed privately. So were everybody else that gave public submissions. So this is nothing special, nothing new. It is all part of the process. The second reason is repetition would be performative rather than informative. Now that's when Alistair for me was like, oh, you are joking. Because I don't know about you, those 1:00 presses felt very performative to me during the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, the whole thing was a performance, wasn't it? I mean, look, you only need to look back to February 2020 when the Diamond Princess cruise ship docked in Japan, and we found out through that COVID did kill people who were elderly and infirm. We could see that very clearly. But not everybody on that cruise ship, even though that they were sharing the same spaces, the same air conditioning, the same everything, not everybody got it. And also, none of the young people were entirely affected by it. So we knew right from the very beginning, and that information was suppressed. It was suppressed by the media and it was suppressed by our government. Why weren't we talking about that? And the reason was because it was all a performance.
Yeah, it was suppressed and ignored.
And ignored, yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and then one of the third reasons is the risk of misuse of public evidence and harassment. So basically, what they're saying is they didn't want their public inquiry hearings to be clipped and chopped up and spread through social media in case that, they weren't shown in a favourable light.
So do you mean like the way that they clipped and chopped up footage of the protesters and then put them into documentary films like Fire and Fury next to clips of Nazis marching down the street in 1930, stuff like that, just putting things together that didn't really fit together? Is that what they're talking about? Because that's what they did. It's just you always know what they are doing because they accuse you of doing it, right?
Absolutely. They are doing the thing they accuse you of all the freaking time. Lastly, and this is my personal favourite, avoiding unnecessary cost delay and legalistic procedures. Now, one of the things the Commission said, because they are compelled, they have the power to compel the fearful four to turn up, which is what the Face the Music campaign is all about. They claim that it's adversarial in doing that, so therefore fits outside of the scope of the inquiry. Now, my argument is that if you've already got that power to do it, it's not adversarial, it is procedural. What do you think about that, Alistair?
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, look, it's not adversarial. They spent taxpayers' money. They locked people in their homes. They closed businesses. They stopped New Zealanders coming back from overseas. They stopped New Zealanders from visiting their loved ones while they lay dying in hospitals and so on. New Zealanders have the right to know why. New Zealanders have the right to ask questions of these people. They are being paid on the taxpayers' dime. It's not adversarial. This is, as you say, it's procedural. It's part of being a government. It's part of that responsibility.
Yeah, it is part of that responsibility. So let's jump to some clips now to have a look at how the media has reacted to this. And one of the things that I have found most intriguing about this entire process has been they say that time heals all wounds, Alistair, but time has done some very funny things to our friends at Legacy Media. I swear I hear Aborigines and things have changed. The winds have changed blowing through. So let's play this first clip. This is from the interview that Chris Hipkins did the morning after the news broke with Mike Hosking on
So how about the call from the
ZB Breakfast?
Labor Party not to front for the COVID inquiry, from Jacinda Ardern to Chris Hipkins, Grant Robertson, Aisha Verrill. No one is willing to show up publicly, so next week's hearings are off. Chris Hipkins is with us. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
Do you realise how shocking this looks?
What's that, Mike?
You not turning up.
Well, I have turned up. I've turned up to the Royal Commission twice. I was interviewed by the first Royal Commission, I was interviewed by the second Royal Commission, and when they sent through written questions, I gave them about 20 pages of answers. As the Royal Commission themselves said yesterday, I've answered every question that they've asked and given them every piece of information that they've asked for.
My apologies. You're not turning up in public.
Well, I mean, the Royal Commission themselves have said that they're not holding any further public hearings. They've set out a variety of reasons for that. And one of the things that they said in their minute of the decision that they took not to hold further public hearings was that the ministers, the former ministers concerned, have answered every question that's been put to them.
Right.
He just sounds like a petulant child, doesn't he?
He does, and scripted too. Like, I think that there was an all-nighter that was had to get those comms down. So I bet there was probably a comms person in their office, a person from Denton's, which we'll hear about a little later on in this clip. And I think that they were absolutely wargaming these interviews that he did the next day.
Yeah, let's have a listen to the next clip, because I definitely think that you're onto something there when you talk about Denton's. Here it is here.
No, appearing publicly. Just for future reference, for the rest of the questions in this interview, I'm referring to you appearing publicly, right? So was it Denton's who advised you not to appear publicly, or did you advise them?
Well, the thing is, you're misrepresenting my position, Mike. I have appeared before the Commission.
You've not appeared publicly before the Commission.
Well, I have answered all of the Commission's
I'm not saying
questions.
that. I've said you have not appeared publicly before the Commission. Did they advise you not to appear publicly, Denton's?
I indicated to the Commission that I was very happy to cooperate with the
Did Denton's advise you not to appear publicly?
Well, one of the things that Denton's did raise with us, they raised several issues. One was that no ministers had previously done this, and that it would create a precedent if we did so. The second thing they raised was concerns about the fact that people who had already appeared publicly before the Royal Commission had been the subject of significant abuse, and that is a concern that the Commission themselves, the Royal Commission themselves, have acknowledged in the decision that they took yesterday.
So the spin doctors told you not to appear.
The spin doctors told you not to appear.
You know, why does he need to go and get legal advice? If everything was on the up and up, why does he need to get legal advice? This is part of the job, right? You explain what it is that you are doing. So you got to ask yourself, why would he even be? Just for people that don't know, they're talking about Denton's. That's an international law firm, isn't it, Maree?
Yeah, it's huge. They have a huge amount of sway, but from what I understand, their speciality is in contract law.
And contract law. What contract we could be talking about?
I don't know. I don't know.
Is Jacinda Ardern. I wonder what they would have in common, Maree.
I don't know. Perhaps. But yes, there was a certain element of scripting there. You could tell. I mean, this, even if they were up all night wargaming this, the fact that he hit him on the Denton stuff he wasn't expecting, he hadn't had that wargamed like he needed to. The interview he did with Ingrid Hipkiss and Corin Dan, which I think was just after this one, he literally rolled out exactly the same talking points again, about the significant rise of abuse that we received and all of these tropes, which I don't think are landing quite the same way that they were landing in 2022.
Look, I remember one of his colleagues, Michael Wood, standing up in Parliament and inciting hatred against a big part of the New Zealand population by calling them a river of filth. If we're going to talk about that kind of thing, again, it's projection, isn't it? This is what they did. He was also I seem to recall, he was the one that said that he was going to hunt down the unvaccinated, didn't he? So there's been plenty of abuse, Chris. I think it's time for you to, I don't know, maybe face the music, mate.
Yes, definitely face the music. One of the things that I've maintained all along, whether it's been here in 360 or over on Media Matters, is that the second part of the inquiry was always going to be difficult when you had key figures in the decision-making process who are still sitting in the House, and that is Hipkins and Beryl, right? I actually think old Robbo and Jacinda, especially Jacinda, because she's not here. She's off speaking a book. She's got the documentary. She's doing interviews with Oprah. I mean, she's living her best life. Our Cindy girl, living her best life. I don't think she's having any problems throwing our hypocrite, hypocrite under the bus. He's wearing it. I mean, if I were Christopher Hipkins, I would be watching your back at the moment, because I'd be seeing other little gingers like Kieran McNulty hot on your heels going like this, thinking, oh, there's 15 months to the next election. You know, I don't think it would be a very comfortable time being the leader of the opposition at the moment.
Well, I think, maybe let's move on to the next clip. It's
Mm.
David Seymour, right? And one of the reasons why I think this is a good time to talk about that is because, to me, in my memory of all of that, and having been on the Parliament lawns during that protest, just remembering how every one of those leaders of the parties in the opposition as well all signed a piece of paper to say that they wouldn't go and meet the protesters. They held the line together inside the Parliament just while the protesters were holding the line outside the Parliament. And so that makes this next clip especially poignant, doesn't it?
It does.
Right now.
Oh, sorry, I'm running away.
Oh.
Kidding. That's the other guys.
David, Chris Hipkins denies that he's dodging public accountability, despite refusing to give oral evidence before the Royal Commission. What do you make of it?
Well, he was happy to be in our living rooms at 1 p.m. every day from the so-called podium of truth. Where's he gone? What's changed? I would have thought, if you cared about this country and responding to its next pandemic, which will happen, then you'd want to front up and tell your story. I think the contrast between his behaviour during the pandemic, when they do anything to get in front of the cameras, when we had to endure a 20-minute lecture before they gave us the daily numbers, compared with this behaviour we've learned about today, I think that contrast speaks for itself.
He says that he's answered already all of the questions that that need to be answered. Is there any problem with that?
Well, of course, they could have just given us the COVID data at 1 o'clock every day, but they were happy to talk for 20 minutes before they actually gave us the numbers. And I just ask, what's changed between when they were happy to invade our living room every single day and when they're being asked to do something for New Zealand by a Royal Commission and they're nowhere to be seen? I think that's really disappointing. I think it's important that we recognise the size of the challenge that they put in front of New Zealand. Shutting people down, I mean, school attendance is still on the recovery path from the 2022 plummet that it got after years of COVID lockdowns and disruption. People are still traumatised from missing out on seeing their dying loved ones or missing the birth of their child because of the restrictions that these people put in place. I don't think it's unreasonable to show up for an hour or two and actually give your side of the story for the posterity of the nation.
Maree?
Yeah, this is David Seymour of pre-October 2021. It's like he's had a little memory hole that started in October 2021 and it lasted through to about September of 22. It's about an entire year that David forgot, because this was the Seymour people forget. But Seymour, he's gone back to what he was discussing at that time. And then he took a big flip and a switch at the beginning of October of 21, which is when the mandates were announced at the end of the month. And he started changing his messaging towards the no jab, no job. And then the mandates were announced and he was all in there, boots and all, and saw the ACT numbers halve in the polls. He was riding high up until that point. He's now gone back to that Seymour of old, because that Seymour in October 21 opened the back door for Winston Peters and New Zealand First.
That's what David Seymour is. He's a pollster. He's a poll chasing politician, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Now, the positive on this is I'll take it. If he's going to be putting this pressure on and he's going to be putting this out, because there are a lot of people that don't live in our sphere that see this information. So if he is somebody that they listen to and trust, and they're actually hearing, because what Seymour is saying is the truth, the fact that he has been a weasel up a drain pipe is and completely another story. But if people are listening to that and hearing it and going, yeah, actually, I'd like to hear what they have to say, this is a good thing, because this is part of that public pressure to put on them to face the music.
Yeah, and look, also, Rodney Hyde, we were talking on a group chat offline earlier this week and, or late last week. And Rodney Hyde made this comment, didn't he? That it shows that there's a crack in the wall, there's a crack in the facade. They were all holding the line, even the opposition parties, and now they've turned on each other. It's only a matter of time before it all crumbles down and they start flinging dirt at each other.
Yeah, and it's not only Seymour, it's ranks within National. Even Christopher Luxon threw a wet lettuce leaf into the ring as well. So they're all having a crack at it, which is quite good. But we've got to remember, I mean, this isn't all just Chippy's party. And it appears that also Jacinda has been, she sort of breezed through with her book tour. And just as we've recovered from seeing a different kind of power everywhere, we now have to be tortured with seeing a new book at our bookshelves from Grant Robertson called Anything Could Happen.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm doing this too soon, aren't I? Or shall we just play it?
Yeah.
So this is Grant Robertson and his interview, and just a little clip from his interview with Jack Tame the other day.
Let's talk your time in Parliament. So on several occasions in the book, you discuss the scale of your spending as Finance Minister, and you say that many of your critics are purveyors of, quote, hindsight economics. They were, at times, calling for more spending and more stimulus. But in the spirit of introspection, do you now accept that your government spent too much?
No. There were no costless decisions in COVID. We either paid in money or we paid in lives. And we did say we'd go hard and early, that we would push for cash flow and confidence when it...
We would pay in money or we would pay in lives. And don't you love it? That very confident no.
Maree, it's like what you said before about Christopher Hipkins. That was a completely rehearsed soundbite answer, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They had that one worked out long before. This is a group of people, and I'm talking about him, and I'm talking about our former Prime Minister, and all of them, especially our former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. They live in the thrall of PR consultants. Everything is tailored. Everything. There is absolutely nothing behind it. It's just nice, pretty sounding sound bites.
Oh, it's inauthentic. It's inauthentic. And literally Helen Keller could see that with that interview. It is so inauthentic. But more than that, he has the gall to say that. And this interview was done like a good week after the Treasury report had come out, and it was scathing about his financial performance as finance minister. But no, he didn't do anything wrong, Alistair. It was either money or lives. It was money or the bag, money or lives. Oh, there you go. And there we go. Treasury briefing, pointing the finger at the government. This was quite brave by Treasury. Again, this report from Treasury, I don't think we would have seen even 6 months ago.
Yeah, look, I've highlighted these lines here. Wage subsidies and similar schemes during lockdowns made up about 35% of the costs of the response. A further 18% came from health system costs. The remaining nearly half, in quotation marks, was made up of a wide range of initiatives that Treasury said had varied objectives. Some were aimed at directly responding to the impacts of COVID-19. Others were aimed at providing fiscal stimulus or achieving social or environmental objectives. Sorry, he just said that they spent every dime. It was either saving money or saving lives. Was that what he said? So, so spending money was supposed to save lives. How does achieving social or environmental objectives do that? Right.
Well, that is a $6 million question, especially when under urgency at the first lockdown to put through the legislation, because let's face it, as David Seymour found out, well, it was leaked to his team, that those lockdowns, that very first lockdown was illegal. They did not have the legislation in place. So anybody that breached that first lockdown, I think, what was it, for the first 10 days, could not be prosecuted because they did not have the law behind them. So they had to rush through urgency to get that law in place. But at the same time, because let's not waste a good sitting of the House, Alistair, let's put through the legislation for late-term abortion. How is that saving lives?
Yeah, when you're supposed to be, we were told that this was the greatest crisis in our country's history since World War II, and they were thinking about all those things. Um, when we were talking about protecting our health system, where was the investment in our health system with all those billions of dollars? No, we were spending it on things like that, and other objectives, like, for instance, the disinformation project. I believe they got a little bit of money out of it too. But here's the thing for me about all of this, Maree, and I think this is what it all comes down to, and our interview tonight is all about this as well, is that, yeah, we can sit here and we can throw stones, and we can make all sorts of snide comments about it and all of that. But the real key point right now is to focus on the evidence. The evidence is coming out. The evidence is there. That's what our interview is going to be focused mainly on, just evidence. It's not about opinions at this point. It's about evidence. That's why we want them to front up to the Royal Commission. And I think, the evidence in Grant Robertson's case is that they spent so much money, they created a COVID bubble. And now we've got inflation. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got a health system that's buckling under the strain of the spending and all of that stuff. And now I'm even starting to see headlines about an emerging mortgagee housing crisis, because people took the money and they went out and they bought up big, and the housing market went up with it, and people were spending crazy money. There are so many different ways that you can look back on this, the insanity of Grant Robertson's spending and that Labor government spending. And I think it's really important for us now just to focus on the pieces of evidence and put them in front of their faces. Do it dispassionately.
That is a beautiful segue for our last clip before we go to the interview. And hold that book up again for me, because the people's position, and I'm getting Alistair to do it because I left mine on the kitchen table. I'm saying I was going to bring it. I know. So the evidence, that is hundreds of pages of evidence, all referenced, that the team, Katie Ashley-Coppins, Claire Deeks and Alia Bland, gave to our commissioners, both behind closed doors and in a public submission. And then they've now made this available to anybody that wants to be able to get hold of a copy of it, right? That document. Evidence. Absolutely jam-packed full of evidence. However, there are some key experts out there that, it's just too busy, because, again, their farts don't stink, and they have all the evidence that, that they need to know. And that is, of course, our friend, Dr. Michael Baker. My husband will tell you, during the pandemic, he actually had to stop me watching from television, because Michael Baker was the one person I used to growl and hiss like a cat every time he came on my screen. So television went off for Maree. It wasn't good for her mental health. I'm sure I'm not alone on this. However, the People's Position went out to actually get a little bit of media, a bit of traction in New Zealand Herald. So Ryan Bridge thought, well, this document's come out. I've got a copy. Who should I get on the dog and bone and have a chat about it? Let's talk to Dr. Michael Baker, and see what he's got to say.
A new book written by those opposed to vaccines is aiming to, quote, shatter the official COVID-19 narrative. The book claims the vaccine could cause cancer and genomic instability, suggesting that deaths increased as a result of the booster vaccine rollout, not the pandemic. Published by the Voices for Freedom group, who stormed Parliament in 2022, were part of those storming Parliament in 2022, the book promises a treasure trove of incriminating information about the government's COVID-19 response. So, what do health officials have to say about it? Professor Michael Baker, Otago University epidemiologist, joining us this morning. Professor, good morning.
Hello, Ryan.
Long time no see, which I must say has been a
Yes.
good thing.
Yes.
Hey, what's wrong with them putting out a book like this?
Well, I think everyone in New Zealand, of course, is entitled to self-publish a book on anything, and there are thousands published every year, so that's fine. And everyone who decides to spend $47 to buy this book is, of course, entitled to that and to assess the information in there.
Is there anything wrong in it? Have you had a look?
No, I have not seen it, so I'm limited in what I can say about it. I didn't even know it existed till yesterday when a Herald reporter sent me a link to the book, and I could see it's a rather large book. It's calling itself a report, and it's appears to be aimed at informing discussion to contribute to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID response. And that's the Phase 2 inquiry, which is reporting next February.
They sent me a copy of this. I've had a look at it. One of the things that they obviously have their beliefs about what's gone on, what's gone wrong, and then scientists have their beliefs about what's gone on, what's gone wrong. Can you just tell us what is the difference between a scientist coming out and saying, you coming out and saying something or publishing your own book and these guys publishing their own book? I mean, can I not just read whichever one makes most sense to me?
Yeah, of course, everyone's entitled to get information from whatever source they like. But I would say when I devote my limited reading time, I start with what is called the peer-reviewed science literature. So generally, if you're a scientist in New Zealand, and there are some scientists who've contributed to this, the advice would be that, well, the normal practice is you submit your views to a peer-reviewed journal, and then it is assessed by other scientists, and then it's put out in the public arena if it reaches certain standards of quality.
In my limited reading time, I did like Ryan's little backhanded it's quite good not having seen you for such a long time. That was quite good.
Well, I just think that it's very, very clear that Michael Baker's being very, very careful with his words. At the height of the COVID period, these were people that were just throwing out labels like conspiracy theorist and cooker and misinformation and extremists and river of filth and all of that. And now he's saying everybody has the right to self-publish, and you have the right to just look at all the information and decide for yourself. We weren't allowed to decide for ourselves at the time, I seem to recall.
But in his limited reading time, Alistair, he needs good quality peer-reviewed information. You can tell he's obviously not read the book, because I think there's reference upon reference from peer review in there. So
on almost every page, we're talking that there are references with links to every one of the things that are being identified and so on. I also remember during the COVID period, you would ask a question of one of the government departments, and they would send you something which would say, here's your answer. Your answer can be found at this link, and you'd click on that link and it would go to somewhere completely different. But the job was done, right? They were off the phone. They weren't in front of your face anymore. And so they would just spend a hell of a lot of time hiding. This is an extremely comprehensive book. I'm so proud of Alia and Claire and Katie and everyone else who contributed to this. And of course, one of the people that contributed to it was Martin Lally, the subject of our interview tonight, right?
yeah, and we're going to get to that now. Just to remind everybody, if you've jumped in a little bit late, the comments have been rolling right throughout the show. We're about to turn those off, and we will turn them back on at the conclusion of the interview. We can see the comments, so still feel free to comment through the comments. I mean, honestly, I haven't seen the comments are absolutely rocketing by. You guys are having a fantastic conversation in there. We're not trying to censor you. We're just going to turn the comments off, because there is not only this fantastic interview that Alistair has conducted, but also too, there are a lot of graphics overlaying the interview that show the receipts of what Martin is talking about. So I'll hand it over to you, Alistair. Give us an introduction of what everyone can expect, and snuggle in, everybody. This is going to be a fun 37 minutes.
So the big news in the past week in regards to the COVID inquiry going on right now in New Zealand is that Jacinda Ardern, Chris Hipkins, Grant Robertson and Ayesha Verrill, four of the main architects of the New Zealand COVID response, have refused to appear before the Royal Commission. It's a decision that's jolted us here at RCR, because recently we launched a petition, which you can still find at facethemusic.co.nz, where you can sign and put your voice to the request that those leaders and others front up to the Royal Commission and explain their actions during the COVID period. And I'll tell you something, in the immediate aftermath of the decision by those four not to appear, the number of signatories to our Face the Music petition has skyrocketed because New Zealanders do want answers. In fact, according to a recent Curia poll commissioned by RCR, 69% of Kiwis want to see our former leaders front up. And one of the biggest things that New Zealanders want answers for is the way that the government started and spread what really was a public hysteria when they kicked off the lockdowns with the fear-inducing statements that tens of thousands of us would die. Here it is.
Good afternoon. Cabinet met this morning to discuss our next actions in the fight against COVID-19. If community transmission takes off in New Zealand, the number of cases will double every 5 days. If that happens unchecked, tens of thousands of New Zealanders will die.
And so that's what brings me to the subject of tonight's interview with Martin Lally. He's an economist and a consultant who was formerly an associate professor at Victoria University, who in this interview, he takes us back to that time and shows us the balance that was missing in the news reports of the time. The interview is also a reply of sorts to the recent media around the launch of Sean Hendy's new book. You'll remember Sean Hendy was the physicist turned modeller who informed much of the government's decisions at the time. He was the man who came up with the tens of thousands of people will die line and the figure of the 80,000 deaths that the headlines ran with. And in particular, this interview is Martin's response to Sean Hendy's recent interview with Jack Tame on TV1's Q&A programme, in which Hendy partly defended and partly backtracked on his modelling that drove the COVID response and upended our lives. At the core of what Martin Lally has to say is not only of how badly wrong Sean Hendy's models were, but also that they were demonstrably wrong. Firstly, by events such as the Diamond Princess cruise ship, which showed that the danger of COVID was massively exaggerated. But then also there are the papers written at the time by none other than members of the government inner circle of advisors, namely Michael Baker, Nick Wilson and Tony Blakely, that told us at the time that Hendy's models were wildly inaccurate. Of course, none of this is to say that Sean Hendy is solely to blame for the hysteria that followed. As you'll soon see, what Martin Lally has to say also indicts the media, who took the Hendy numbers and catastrophized the situation into a mass public hysteria that drove the unprecedented lockdowns and vaccination drives, and also an incredible program of spending that will be felt in our economy for generations. But that's my opinion of what you're about to see and hear. You make up your own mind, and if you agree with me, please do go and sign the petition at facethemusic.co.nz and help us put the pressure on the Royal Commission to summon the people who need to answer why they chose hysteria over science. So here is my interview with Martin Lally. He's an economist and consultant who was formerly an associate professor at Victoria University, and I started by asking him, why are we talking to him on this particular subject?
Well, I'm Martin Lally. I'm a retired economist, and during my retirement period, COVID arrived. And one of the amazing things I noticed was that health economists didn't seem to be putting things out in the public domain. So I thought, well, I should have a go at this. So I did, and the more I read about it, the more interesting it all became, and it just grew with the crisis.
During the COVID period, why did we all listen to Sean Hendy to give us the modelling data? What was his background that made him the go-to person for that?
Well, he wasn't an obvious choice. Sean's a physicist, and you would have thought that the government would have been relying on people with epidemiology backgrounds. And up until we locked down on the 23rd of March, they were drawing on advice from people like Michael Baker and Nick Wilson and Tony Blakely, the sort of heavy hitters of the epidemiology profession in New Zealand, and they were writing papers for public consumption, and they were doing reports for the Ministry of Health and so forth. But at the time we locked down, it seems the government did a sharp shift away from them towards Sean, and they effectively displaced the epidemiologists like Michael Baker and Nick Wilson from that point onwards as advisors to the government.
Let's go back to the very beginning of the COVID era for most New Zealanders. Where it started was a press conference where our Prime Minister stood up and said 80,000 people could die if we don't lock down. That number came from Sean Hendy, didn't it?
That's correct.
So where did that number come from? Is it accurate?
No. What Sean did was he listed a number of possible policies that the government might pursue, a number of control policies that the government might do. And these were just a list that had been generated by a British scientist who was advising the British government, Professor Ferguson.
Yes.
So it was a list of possible policies the government might pursue. They might close down this, they might close down that. There are about half a dozen of these sort of control possibilities. And included in that list was what Professor Hendy called no control, meaning what if the government didn't impose any controls at all? And there the figure is, it's actually about 83,000. And naturally, people took that to be a forecast. If the government does nothing, there'll be 83,000 deaths. Now, subsequently, Professor Hendy said, no, that's a misunderstanding. That figure there of 83,000 is not simply a situation in which the government doesn't do anything. It's a situation in which people don't react to COVID deaths around them. So the mathematical modelling exercise that Professor Hendy went through that generated this 80,000 figure was one in which, as COVID spreads through the community, because there's no government controls and more people are dying, no one reacts to it. Bodies are dropping down around them and they don't react. Well, that's preposterous. The more people die, that would be given an awful lot of publicity and people would change their behaviour. They would reduce their interactions with other people. And as a result, you could never, ever get to the 80,000 figure. And that's something that Sean makes very clear in his book, that the 80,000 figure was not a forecast. It was simply a scenario in which people do not react. Of course, it's not unrealistic. But here's the problem, that in his paper in 220, in which this 80,000 figure is mentioned and the words no control are mentioned, he does not anywhere in that paper emphasise that this figure also assumes people do not react, that is not realistic, and therefore we could never, ever possibly get to 80,000.
So what was the real number, do you think? What was the real number? If it's not 80,000, if that's the number, which is everybody just carries on and ignores the dead bodies falling at their feet, what's the real number?
Well,
what should have they?
That's difficult to answer, but there are some numbers that can be put out there. One of them is a forecast that was presented by Professor Nick Wilson to the Ministry of Health on the 20th of March 2020, a few days before we locked down. And Wilson estimates a worst case scenario if no actions are taken by the government of 27,000 dead. Now that's a worst case. So it's only 1/3 of Hendy's figure, and the obvious cause of the difference is that within Wilson's analysis, he's allowing for the fact that people will change their behaviour. But that's just a forecast. A better indicator would be to look at what actually happened in countries that did not lock down, such as Sweden or Iceland, or countries that did lock down, but it didn't work. Countries like France, Britain, and so forth. And I did a statistical analysis of that, of European countries, to see whether death rates were affected by whether they locked down or not, and in particular the severity of their restrictions. And that analysis, that sort of analysis was done by other people as well. And it shows that in Europe, the lockdowns appeared to have no effect on the death rate. So the death rate that we would have got in New Zealand, you can get some sort of sense of it by looking at the experience in Europe. But you have to allow for the fact that there are features of New Zealand that, if the government had not instituted lockdowns, would have acted in our favour relative to countries in Europe. But one of them is the fact that we're an island. That helps you. You don't get this constant inflow of new cases. You have some control over who crosses your border. We also have a lower population density than European countries. And the tighter you pack people together, the more the disease leaps from one person to another. We also have a smaller total population. So when you allow for those sorts of things, my estimate was that we would suffer a few thousand deaths from COVID, much less than the European death rate because of these favourable features of our country.
But of course, in defence of Sean Hendy, he was having to do these calculations in the heat of the moment, wasn't he? At a time when nobody knew how bad COVID was going to be.
Yes, he was trying to give advice to the government in real time. But the first analysis I ever did on this comes from early March 2020, before the government locked down. We already had some pretty reasonable evidence about what was going to happen. What you would like in a situation like this is you would like to be able to take a community, enclose them in a barbed wire fence so no one comes in or out, infect a few people in the community, watch to see how it spreads, how many of them get it, and then how many of them die. You'd like to be able to conduct a controlled experiment like that. Ethically, you couldn't conduct such an experiment, but by sheer chance, we got such an experiment conducted in February 2020. It was a cruise ship called the Diamond Princess, and it picked up some cases from China in January and headed off to its next destination in Japan. And by the time it got to Japan, it was discovered that of the about 3,500 people on the ship, most of them passengers who were elderly, despite the fact they were in very close proximity to one another with their buffet dinners and, the air circulation system in the ship pumping it all over the place, only 700 of them in the end tested positive for it. And of those 700, only something between 7 and 14 died.
This is in early 2020.
This is in February and early March 2020. So knowledge of this was available before we locked down on 23rd of March.
So he's not making these calculations completely blind.
No, he's got some background data. But all those people who died, 7 to 14, they're all amongst the elderly passengers. None of the crew members died, despite the fact that quite a number of them were found to be infected. And that told you that youngish, healthy people were not at risk of COVID, that COVID was a problem for the elderly and the sick. We knew that from the Diamond Princess. We didn't have to wait until the end of 220 or 221 to understand the severity of this disease. We understood from the equivalent of a perfect scientific controlled experiment just what we were dealing with.
Sean Hendy also, though, talks about, in his interview with Jack Tame, he talks about how we had to do this because there are some parts of the community who were more susceptible to it, more endangered to it. And so we had to lock down everybody to save those people. In particular, he's talking about the Maori population.
Well, that's just complete nonsense.
It's nonsense.
Yes, the part of the community that was in danger was identified by the Diamond Princess. It's the old, and in particular the old with comorbidities. There are some variations across ethnic groups, but they're not at all like the stuff that Hendy was giving to us. If you look at the data that's currently on the Ministry of Health's website, this is the Ministry of Health. This isn't Martin Lally's numbers. This isn't some fringe right-wing outfit just pulling numbers out of the air. This is the Ministry of Health. On their website, they tell us that 2,900 people have died of COVID to date. Of those 2,900 people, they identify 230 of them as Māori. So that means that 8% of the deaths were Māori. Now, Māori are, if you go to another website of the New Zealand government, you'll find that Māori are 17% of the population. So far from Māori being disproportionately badly affected by COVID, it's the other way around. They got off rather lightly compared with other groups. It's the same with Pacifica. They constitute about 4% of the deaths, and Pacifica are 8% of the population. So like the Māori, they got off relatively lightly. It's Pākehā who were disproportionately affected by COVID.
What was their percentage then?
Well, they're the bulk of the rest of the population. So if Māori and Pacifica are getting off lightly, the rest, namely Pākehā mostly, must therefore have been affected more than proportionately to their population. That's just mathematical.
It does feel like the entire thing was based on exaggeration after exaggeration after exaggeration.
Well, certainly there's a distinct pattern there with Sean. The failure in the 220 paper to state this 80,000 figure is if people do not react, and that can't possibly happen. That's a mistake. The claims that the Māori and Pacifica population were disproportionately affected by this, he states that repeatedly in his book. That's nonsense. The claim that the life expectancy of Māori is decades less than that of Pākehā, it's nonsense. There's a consistent pattern of statements from Sean that are all seem to be tilted in one direction. Now, is that just bad luck? Is it like flipping a coin 5 times and just getting by chance heads all the time? I'm not going to say that Sean calculatedly says these things in order to produce a desired result, but there is certainly a pattern here. Whether it's due to just bad luck or whether it's design, I won't comment on.
Okay, another point that is brought up in the Sean Hendy interview with Jack Tame is the issue of QALYs.
Yeah.
Can you explain this one to us?
Yes. Not all deaths are equally serious. If you die in a car accident, a typical person who dies in a car accident is 40 years old. Could be less, could be more, but that's kind of an average. And you're healthy. And because you're 40 and you're healthy, you've got a remaining life expectancy of 40, 45 years. Okay? If you die in that car accident, you have lost 45 life years. Whereas if you're a COVID victim, a typical COVID victim is a person who has only got about 5 years left in the tank. That's a mixture of being old and having comorbidities. And those 5 years, they're not high quality life years, because with these comorbidities, your quality of life is nothing like that of a typical 40-year-old. So you might make a deduction from that and say you haven't lost 5 quality adjusted life years, you've lost 4. You've lost 5 life years, but we're degrading that by 20% to bring it down to 4. So every COVID victim on average loses 4 years of their life. But a person who dies in a car accident or an earthquake, they've lost 40 life years. And I think most people would think it was reasonable to say that we should focus on life years rather than lives. The result of that is that COVID victims are the loss we're experiencing in quality adjusted life years there is only 1/10 of what it would be for car accident victims. So if you take the people who did die of COVID, the 2,900, call it 3,000 that the Ministry of Health seems to think is the right figure, you divide that by 10 to get the equivalent number of people who have died on the road. 3,000 COVID deaths is the equivalent of about 300 people dying on the roads. Now, there's an important difference. If someone had said, shock horror, 3,000 people are going to die from COVID, that sounds bad. But if you'd said, shock horror, 300 people are going to die from COVID, then it would just look like seasonal flu. But bear in mind, seasonal flu, again, like COVID, the people who are dying there are the people with the low quality years. So this makes a big difference. You've got to do the analysis in terms of QALYs to get a sensible view of what's happening. And this is what health economists do. People like Michael Baker and Nick Wilson and Tony Blakely All of these people, if you look at their academic papers, all the analysis is done in terms of quality adjusted life years. And when they did their analysis on what they thought would happen with COVID, they make that adjustment. And they use this figure of 5 years left in the tank. Whereas Sean persistently will not touch qualities. He's always focused on lives rather than qualities. And you might say that's yet another example of how Sean is hyping the problem. There's a consistent pattern there.
It's a consistent pattern, and it's a consistent pattern across the media and the government. Why? What was the point in making the whole of New Zealand fear for their lives in this way?
Well, I hate to say this, but we're in a capitalist system.
Yeah.
And the media is by and large part of that capitalist system. And you've got to draw the attention of people. You've got to sell your paper. You've got to get the clicks. You don't get the clicks by telling people that everything's fine today. There's no problems in the world. The way you get the clicks and the people buying your paper is to catastrophize disasters.
It's an extremely cynical view, though.
It explains the data very well, though. It's a scientific hypothesis that fits the data very well. But we also need economists to advise the government on, well, what impact is this going to have on the country? What will be the GDP losses that result from that? And then we need other experts to talk about, well, what will be the effects on the mental health of people who are locked in their houses for weeks on end? There's a whole series of branches of science and economics that need to be brought together to assess this question. It isn't just a question of going to the epidemiologist and say, give us the deaths.
Are you saying that those weren't done? Were those measurements done for the GDP and the social cost?
Treasury did present some estimates to the government of what the economic effects would be under different policies. But it does not seem that anybody in government combined the epidemiological estimates of deaths with the GDP losses. And a very good example of this is a paper that was written by Professors Baker, Wilson and Blakely, and that was published on the 20th of March 2023, shortly before we locked down. And they estimated that lockdowns will be justified so long as the economic cost is under $2.5 billion.
$2.5 billion?
Yes. And I emailed Tony Blakely and I said, basically, well, surely Tony realised if we lock down, the GDP losses will be vastly in excess of $2.5 billion. And Tony replied by email. He said, well, you're the economist. You economists need to sort that out. I don't have that level of expertise. So someone in government needed to take that sort of advice and combine it with advice from Treasury on what the economic costs would be, and then form a judgment on whether the lockdowns made sense. There's never been any indication from anything I've ever seen that any such analysis was done by government before they made the lockdown decision.
Has it been done since? Do we know what the final figure was?
Remarkably enough, 3 months after we locked down, Nick Wilson and Tony Blakely were co-authors, along with some others, of a paper, this is June 2020, in which they estimated the GDP losses, the deaths, the QALYs that would result from New Zealand following the policy it did, Australia following the policy it did, and then comparing it with a Swedish type approach. And they concluded for both New Zealand and Australia that the Swedish approach was much, much better.
Sorry, when was that paper written?
That paper was appeared on a website in June 2020, 3 months after we locked down.
We knew it that early on.
Well, I had done similar analysis myself. I was working on similar analysis, but I hadn't seen their paper at that point. I discovered it later on.
Because we were told at the time, I remember very clearly, that the Swedish model was nonsense.
Yes, we were being told that what the Swedes were doing was nonsense, and yet here is Tony Blakely, Nick Wilson, and they've produced a paper in 2020 which says that both New Zealand and Australia are following the wrong policy.
So the argument, we were just doing the best we could with the little information we had, doesn't really cut it there.
No.
Why didn't anybody speak out at that point.
It's not important whether you speak out, it's a question of whether the media will take any notice of you. Everything I ever wrote about COVID, starting in March 2020, I circulated it to journalists in the mainstream media. No uptake. None of them had any interest in even emailing me back to say thank you for that, interesting, let alone talking to me, let alone interviewing me. Just no. You maximize your profits with catastrophizing of disaster. You don't want to hear from the Martin Lallys of this world who say, hold on, I think we're overreacting. Instead, you go to the people who say the sky is falling in, and that's Sean Hendy.
It goes further than that, though, with the media, and I also put the government into it, but you're talking about the media, that the people that did speak out were smeared, they were called conspiracy theorists, they were called nut jobs, they were really made to be outcasts in society. This was a campaign to run a certain narrative, wasn't it?
Yes, I think a very good example of the mass hysteria and the vitriol and the abuse that was generated from the scientific and medical community towards anyone in that community who didn't think that lockdowns were a good idea. We can go to a publicly available source. So in late 2020, you have the Great Barrington Declaration. It's a declaration that's drafted by three very serious scientists, Oxford University, Stanford, Harvard, the creme de la creme of academic institutions in the world. And they draft a memorandum which basically says we don't favour lockdowns, we favour lesser measures to address this problem. And if you go to the Wikipedia page that relates to the Great Barrington Declaration, it gives you a long list of reactions to it from various people, and it's all negative. You've got Dr. So-and-so saying these people are nuts. Dr. Y or Professor Z says that their views will lead to a catastrophe, that this is a culling of the ill and the sick, that it's grotesque, that it's mass murder, and even the F word is used to describe people who promoted and signed this declaration. Now that's extraordinary vitriol. That's the sort of thing you would expect to come from the worst parliaments in the worst countries in the world in describing their political opponents. But instead, it's coming from people in the scientific community, people holding advanced qualifications, prestigious positions. And here they are. And this isn't even a slip of the tongue. They said it in an interview before they could stop the words coming out of their mouth. They've written these things, and it sits there on the Wikipedia page. And Wikipedia isn't too ashamed to even produce it. It's the whole thing is a condemnation, not just to the people who wrote those things, but that Wikipedia would even allow it to go on their site. It's appalling.
This is one of the hypocrisies about Sean Hendy and what he writes about in his book, and when he does his interviews, he talks about how he's the victim from all of that he's the one that copped the abuse, where he was sitting there on television on a pedestal in a bubble being protected. Everything that he said was put out in a positive manner, whereas everybody, like the Great Barrington Declaration is a really good example. All those people were banned from Facebook. They had their posts deleted by Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all of these different social media accounts and so on. There was a concerted effort to destroy freedom of speech on this particular subject.
Well, interesting you say that. If you look at the Great Barrington Declaration, the people who drafted it, they said, we're drafting this declaration as a last resort because journals won't publish our views. Scientific journals won't publish our views. Now, it's very hard to believe that people of the stature that we're talking about here, the three drafters of the declaration, were such incompetent and low-level academics that no journal would take their stuff. It's just preposterous. They got to those prestigious positions in academia because they published stuff in high quality journals.
Yes.
And then finally they get to an issue like this and journals won't touch their stuff. And as a result, they draft the declaration as a sort of a last resort to try to publicise their views. So that speaks to you about not just how the media was censoring adverse views, contrary views, but it also tells you what was happening in the scientific community, that journal editors were acting as censors, were pretty clearly acting as censors in this area.
In hindsight, at the moment, we're going through the COVID inquiry, phase number 2 now. We're told that this is about learning the lessons. What lessons have we learned?
Well, the first lesson I think that we need to learn from this whole exercise is that cost-benefit analysis is absolutely vital. It's no good just taking some forecasts of deaths and saying that's terrible, we need to do something. You've got to balance that against what the costs are going to be. You've got to do what every rational person does who gets into a car. You know there's a risk of being killed, but it's very convenient. You've done a cost-benefit analysis. You do that subconsciously. In respect of locking a whole country down, you need to do that formally. And the tools were there. Treasury had produced estimates of the economic consequences. Epidemiologists like Michael Baker and Nick Wilson were presenting estimates of deaths under various policies. That needed to be pulled together to produce a cost-benefit analysis. So that's the number one thing. If we experience this again, you've got to do cost-benefit analysis. The second thing that's worth doing, now that we're kind of past the most emotional time of it, looking back, just how bad was it compared to some other serious public health issues? I recall being accosted on Lambton Quay by a GP during the whole vaccine period, and I wasn't wearing a mask. We had a bit of a discussion, and he did say to me, well, this is, the worst health crisis we've ever faced. And I said, rubbish. The obesity crisis is far, far, far worse. So let me give you some figures, just to put things in perspective. We now know to date that there's been about 3,000 people who've died of COVID. That's the Ministry of Health's figures. And each one of those people on average lost about 4 quality adjusted life years. So we multiply that by 4 to get 12,000 QALYs. Now let's have a look at the obesity epidemic. About 1.2 million New Zealanders are technically obese. 1.2 million. And it's going to subtract about 10 years from their life expectancy. So 10 times 1.2 million is 12 million. That's 12 million QALYs that are lost in the obesity epidemic. What is more, a typical person suffering from this condition, aged about 40, they've maybe got another 30 years of life in the tank. Those 30 years, the quality of them is degraded by obesity. So the remaining 30 years of their life, they're going to be losing in each one of those years. They're going to be losing maybe 20% of life quality. Well, that's another 7 million QALYs. So when you total it up, there are approximately 20 million QALYs that are being lost by the New Zealand population today as a result of the obesity epidemic. Now, how does that compare to 12,000 from COVID? Well, 12,000 is 1,000th. Less than 1,000th part. It's almost 1/2,000th part of the obesity epidemic. Now, you might respond to this by saying, well, hang on, Martin, the 12,000 QALYs that you're using, it's based on the actual deaths that we suffered from COVID of 3,000. Surely you should be using the forecast of what we would have had if we hadn't locked down. Well, fair enough. Okay, let's take Nick Wilson's 27,000 figure if we hadn't locked down. Multiply it by 4. To get the QALYs, that's 100,000 QALYs. 100,000 QALYs, worst case, it's not the expectation, it's the worst case. 100,000 QALYs. How does that compare to 20 million QALYs from the obesity epidemic? Well, it's pretty small.
They spoke a lot at the time about consensus. The consensus is this, therefore we're going to react in this way. What's the consensus now? would we go through the same process again, do you think?
I think if we get confronted by the same sort of thing, let's say in 10 years' time, so most of the people who will be alive in 10 years' time live through this, I don't think we'll get the same reaction for two reasons. One is, the time COVID happened, it's all new and scary, and the press told us so, so we believed them. Well, fool me once,
yeah.
Shame on you.
Yeah.
Fool me twice, shame on me. So I don't think people are going to fall for it a second time. And I don't even think governments would want to do it, because they know how costly this has been. They know what the GDP losses are. They know how much public debt has been generated as a result of paying people to stay at home. So I don't think if it happens in 10 years' time, we're going to do it again. It won't work. So the media have really badly damaged their credibility by acting in the way that they have. And in addition, governments, unlike the average person on the street, they understand things like the full economic costs. They're getting this information from Treasury. They understand the full economic costs, so that they're not gonna, we can't afford to do it again. You can pay half the population to sit at home for a few months and write them out a check and build up tens and tens of billions of debt. You can't do that every 10 years. You just can't. Your debt level reaches a point where you can't.
These costs are going to be felt for generations. They're not just going to be felt for the next 10 years or so, are they?
Yes. No, to use the sort of language of Sean Hendy, the costs of the pandemic were borne very disproportionately. And one of the areas in which the costs were borne very disproportionately was people who own small businesses that were destroyed. They bore a huge part of the burden. If you're Sean Hendy, you're working as an academic, you're going to get your salary
you don't see
no
it,
matter what. You may be teaching from home, teaching may be suspended altogether, you're going to get your salary. So it's easy for the Sean Hendys of this world to say, we must lock down, it ain't costing them anything. But for people like you, it's destroying their business. If the pain were evenly distributed, or if Sean were a small business person who owned a small business that were destroyed as a result of this, Sean might have a quite different view about this.
There we go. Sean might have quite a different view about this. There was so much there. So much there. Thank you to everyone that popped stuff in the chat. Now, the first thing I will let everybody know is that the links, when it popped up saying there'll be links in the description, all this interview will be going out on the website and the app tomorrow. And all those links will be there. So I know a lot of you will be having itchy trigger fingers and wanting to share this, and we encourage that you do. There's a lot there to digest from Martin, but one of the things for me that was clear, Alistair, is that all the information that the government required, they had well and truly in advance. And yet they had a problem that they already had a prescribed solution for. And it didn't matter what reports that they received. It appears that they took the advice that would give them the most fear, the most clicks. The media were willing participants, and away they went.
Look, I don't think we can say what we know was going through their minds, but what we do know, what the evidence is that there were reports that said almost the opposite to what they went with. And we were never told about that. Though they were reports, they were papers that were published. So the media had access to them, but they chose to only show one narrative. And that is going to be a damning indictment on the media in years to come, as people realize that we did know a lot more. Because, of course, the constant refrain is, oh, they just did the best they could. You know, we didn't know at the time. It's fine to talk about it in hindsight, but they didn't know at the time. Well, actually they did. And the proof is right there. And not only is the proof there, it was written by people who were in the room making the decisions. These guys were the insiders, the advisors to the government. Michael Baker, Tony Blakely, Nick
Wilson.
And, you know, Tony Blakely, just to add to that, sorry, it's all just coming spewing out on me now. Tony Blakely was the one that they put in charge of the first COVID inquiry. He was the guy they put in charge of investigating whether they did the right job or not. It's the mind boggles when you see it so clearly laid out without all the hyperbole, without all the finger pointing and the pejoratives and the ad hominem attacks and all of that stuff. When you see it clearly laid out like what Martin has done, it just, the mind boggles into to what actually occurred. But it also really speaks volumes on why Jacinda Ardern, Chris Hipkins, Grant Robertson and Aisha Verrill do not want to front the campaign, the Royal Commission.
Yeah, because even the softest ball questions that would be posed to them would be questions they still do not want to answer. And I think also they say that these public inquiries, the public hearings are performative. Well, they are in a way, but what they are is an opportunity for all of us to tune in live and look and watch them. And sometimes it's not what is verbally said, but if you turn the sound off and you watch the body language, that's actually telling the full story. And I saw that incredibly clearly with Helen Matusas-Harris. You know, she was throwing a question she didn't know the answer to, and she was obviously making it up on the fly. And I would have thought that if we had those four up there, they could have these questions posed to them and that we could actually hear what it is that they had to say. And even the most basic of questions. What was your trigger points in order to make the decisions that led to the lockdowns and your further responses in the pandemic in the first 3 months? What information did you have and what information did you act on and what information did you discard?
Yeah, look, the thing is too, I watched parts of the testimony that was given and heard the questions that were being asked, and without naming names or pointing to any ones in particular, but my overall feeling as I watched it was that there weren't a lot of the right questions being asked. In fact, I will point to one. You know, I remember Claire and Alia and Katie being asked, you know, do you agree that the government had the right to do the COVID response? Well, that's not for Katie and Claire and Alia to answer. That's not their area of expertise. You know, so were the right questions even being asked? You know, the performative nature, I kind of agree with that, quite frankly. But the thing is too, is that as time goes by and people like Martin speak up, and more will keep on speaking up, you know, the truth does come out slowly, bit by bit. And, you know, as we've seen with the responses to what happened when the famous Fearful Four decided not to show up to the commission, you know, the likes of David Seymour starts piping up. Judith Collins started piping up. These were people that didn't say anything before, but now it's politically expedient to do so. You know, the truth does come out in these cases.
Yeah,
No,
it does.
I don't think, Chris, you can hide from this forever, mate. You know, if you want to, yeah, it's just not going to work.
One of the other things that I loved about the interview with Martin too is that he really called out the media on this, legacy media, because the legacy media cherry-picked what it is that they were going to say. But of course they were always going to. By the time that March 2020 rolled around, they had all been very plumply and well fed by the Public Interest Journalism Fund. And the pandemic was the gift that kept on giving. They were getting fed very royally from the government under the PGIF. And then they were also being fed by the clicks and the fear and the interactions that the entire pandemic drew. And the most catastrophic, the most fearful, the most outrageous things were the things that drove the clicks. So, I mean, in some way, I do actually agree with Martin that there was a monetary incentive for them, but I think that that incentive was also driven by the government. It suited them too.
You remember when, the time that Jamie Lee Ross was on television and Tova O'Brien actually stopped him from stating a lot of the things that actually Martin was talking about tonight. We knew that COVID wasn't nearly as dangerous as what they were talking about. We knew that, it was only really attacking the elderly and infirm. And Jamie was trying to put that point across, and she cut him off. She said, no, I don't want to hear you. I don't want to hear that. This was censorship on live TV going on. So yes, the media needs to really answer for a lot on that. The other big point that I think that I just want to bring up quickly that Martin spoke about was the QALYs. When you put those numbers next to the COVID numbers, when you start comparing them to other diseases and other afflictions, it paints a damning picture, doesn't it, Maree?
It does. It does. And those QALYs were actually picked up by a number of others around the world as well. And yet they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the obesity. They don't want to talk about the diabetes. And even today, they do not want to talk about the QALYs lost with the the cancer numbers for young people going through the roof, the cardiac numbers for young people going through the roof, all these other illnesses and disabilities that are happening as we speak. Oh, let's not speak of those either. There has been there's going to be a very, very long tail to this pandemic of people harmed, hurt, and affected.
Yeah, and look, the statistics as the years go by, they're going to bear that out, aren't they?
They are.
Forever.
Now, look, we're going to wrap this up because we know that we have gone well and truly over time. So these are the things that we want to remind you. The most important thing, first and foremost, facethemusic.co.nz is the name of the website. If you've not signed the petition, you need to do that. This is so important because this is how we will apply pressure to get these the fearful four, as it were, to face the music, to actually appear. 58,922, there you go, it's on the screen, 58,992 rather. We want to get that to 60,000 by tomorrow. Wouldn't that be a really good number? That would be an absolutely fantastic number. So make sure you share this petition to people so they can get that signed and we can apply that pressure. The other thing too is, as I said, all the links for that Lally interview will be in the show notes when that interview drops on the website and the app tomorrow. Share it. Share it. I think this is an interview that you can share to those who may struggle with other elements of the pandemic debate, whether that be mandates or vaccines and the like. Martin didn't go anywhere near there. It was very clear. It was very factual. It was about modelling. It was about the information that they knew. It's about some of the standards that were always there, and also to some of the elements of just statistical data and the willful blindness shown by government in cherry picking what they wanted to follow. So please do share this interview as soon as you get it. We do really appreciate that. It does make a difference. Before we sign off, Alistair, any final thoughts from you?
No, I just want to reiterate, please share the interview and sign the petition. And if you've signed it already, please send it along when you're sharing the interview.
Thank you very much. And thank you again to everybody that has come in tonight. We did actually just kiss on 1,000 people. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure to bring this to you. I'm Maree Buscke. This is Alistair Harding. This has been RCR 360, and we will see you again really, really soon. Thanks to everybody for tuning in.